Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 94, and you're watching two openly heterosexual men talk about all things Anglican. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And you know, Kevin, I gotta be me. And I'm George Conger. And today's March 7th, 2014.
George, let's move on to story one on Anglican Unscripted 94, our first Lenten week. And I don't know if this is a Lent story, but George and I surf the internet. George is a busy priest and a busy father, a busy writer, and he's the co-host of Anglican Unscripted. I own a company and a full-time ministry, and somehow we still have time to search for the...
So you work a lot. Me, I just fiddle fart around.
We're the best fiddle fighters ever. My wife actually says I don't do a thing. So if you ask Mrs. Anglican TV, I do nothing. Just give her the paycheck. Then I get to go out and play. But the reality is we surf the internet and we got to find all the fun stories for the week and get to talk about them. And there's been a fun story that's been brewing around for maybe a week and a half. And the story is, would Jesus bake a cake for a same-sex wedding? And I'm just like, I'm thinking 10 years ago, 20 years ago, would that ever have been a topic on the internet? Probably not. George, how...
Jesus was a carpenter, not a baker. But hey, this is an issue.
So how did this become an issue, George?
Well, in the last few months, and last week in particular, there have been a number of court rulings across the United States where people provide goods and services. Bakers, photographers, caterers, people who rent out facilities for weddings have been forced to provide services to same-sex weddings, even though they've said, no, sorry, we don't really want to get involved with that. We think that's evil and that's wrong and sinful. The courts have said, no, not so fast. If you're in the public domain, you're providing services, your religious liberty must be subordinated to someone's desire for your services.
In fact, they just did something over in the Danish land.
Yes, the Danish government. Who knew? The state of Denmark has said to the Church of Denmark that you must perform gay weddings. You can no longer say, oh, I'm going to opt out and my conscience doesn't let me do it. Sorry, Charlie, no good.
No.
If there's somebody who's gay and they want to get married in your church and you're a priest, you've got to do it. Oh, well, what if I conveniently get sick that day? You've got to find someone else to replace you. The onus is on you to see that that wedding takes place, even though you may believe that this is contrary to God's will and to God's law. According to Danish law, tough luck, Charlie.
Well, it's interesting because this has been a discussion, not in this case, but in other cases for 2,000 years. Where do we draw the line between our reaction with sinners and ourselves? And, well, we're sinners, so this is a hard line to draw, especially when you're in the business world. I am in the business world. I operate an IT company. I don't let the Anglican world know who my IT customers are because I'm afraid they'll call and threaten my IT customers and I'll lose business. I'm just not going to put myself in that position. So I've decided my line is to divide my work life from my ministry life so as the two are affected each other beneficially but not negatively. It works. Just ask Mrs. Anglican TV. So we get to the point now is the question is, what would Jesus do at a wedding if he were invited to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding? Now, nobody really knows, except for Jesus, what he would do. But when I read the Gospels, I don't read the God or the Christ or the Holy Spirit that does what's expected. What is expected, a Christian, an Orthodox Christian would expect Jesus to say, no, I'm not going to bake your cake. A liberal Christian or a person who thinks same-sex marriage is A-okay would say, of course he would bake the cake, he would come and serve, and he would even break bread with us, and the wine would be very good. So I don't read in the Gospels ever the Christ of expectation. It's always something different. And when I was praying about this last week, something occurred to me that would be different that he may do. This is only Kevin's opinion. Let's take it for that. And I'm not a scholar, and If you saw me leading a class in a seminary, you'd probably walk out. But here's what I think Jesus would do. I think Jesus would bake the cake. I think he would be honored to be invited to a same-sex marriage. He would bake a cake. If he can make water into wine, he can make flour into cake and sugar into frosting. And it would probably be a pretty good cake. He'd probably get help from his mother Mary, who was probably a good cook. And she would say, well, you got to bake it at 350 for 20 minutes. Yeah, and layer the cakes and put frosting in between and stuff like that. And he would bring the cake to the wedding. There would be a liturgy. And the rabbi would stand up and give the liturgy and introduce the two people who are getting married and the families. And there would be a point in the ceremony where the rabbi would say, does anybody have any cause why these two people cannot be wedded in holy matrimony? Whoa! You know what Jesus would do? The Jesus who baked the cake, who was invited to the wedding, would stand up and say, yes, there is cause. A man shall not marry a man. A woman cannot marry a woman. They were not made for each other. There's no way two men or two women can consummate the marriage. Need I go on? And Jesus would use this opportunity as a teaching opportunity. The gospel that I read is Jesus always putting himself in a place where he's able to teach those who didn't think they needed to be taught. And here we go again. I don't know if your memories are that good. Mine are. The first miracle, George, was where?
Wedding of Cana.
I would find no difference at a wedding of a same-sex marriage to see a miracle of Jesus teaching people about the reality of God's creation for man and woman. George, I want to teach the world to sing. Well, all right. Sorry. I don't want to get off track here, but the Episcopal Church now has a reimagination task force. And this was formed at the last General Convention because they want to reimagine the church. And the Kumbaya church we call the Episcopal Church isn't working correctly, even though they probably have the best presiding bishop ever. They probably have the best liturgy and theology ever. Something's not working right, George.
Well, even though we have the best presiding bishop ever, for some reason over the past 5 years, the church has been in utter collapse. Administratively, it's not working. General Convention will pass resolutions. They'll say, move out of New York, and New York will say, no, we don't think so. Here's your budget. You can spend $1 million on legal fees. We'll spend $30 million. There's no accountability. There's no management structure. The church is just not working. No. And a committee has put forward 3 proposals to restructure the church. And they all focus around the position and person of the presiding bishop. And it really is odd, Kevin, that since we have the best presiding bishop ever, that this issue would come up now. But hey, there you are.
Well, I guess the 3 different proposals are, first, we make the presiding bishop papal. Give her all the power in the world. The other one is to make her a real...
Let's do more of what we're doing and do it even better.
The other proposal would to make her a presiding bishop, where she's just a bishop who actually serves in a diocese, but presides over the general functions of what's going on and give more control back to the General Convention for with which it belongs. And the third proposal?
It's to hire a general secretary, an administrator who will hire treasurers and a professional business staff to run the affairs of the church, subject to the oversight of a board led by the presiding bishop. So either total power to the presiding bishop, no power to the presiding bishop, or a greatly reduced power to the presiding bishop and professionals in charge.
Here's the difficulty, is you can never know what kind of presiding bishop you're going to get in the Episcopal Church. And we go way back to who's the guy before Griswold? Browning?
Ed Browning.
Ed Browning. Ed Browning, nice guy, thought he had it all going on, but had a treasurer who was slipping money from the till. You know, and $2 million later, he's running over this big financial crisis in the church. What happened to our $2 million? And gets audited and has to find that. And, well, a lot of that had to do with bad structure and no oversight, no checks and balances with the treasurer and finance office. And yeah, the churches were broken way back then. It never became fixed under Frank Griswold, but Frank, for all his faults, never really stumbled into any structural issues. All his were theological stumbles. George, what is a true fix for the Episcopal Church?
Kevin, before I answer that question, poor Ellen Cook went to prison for stealing only $2 million.
I know.
Under this current presiding bishop, she shoveled $30 million into the coffers of the law firm of her personal attorney.
Mm-hmm.
To make money, you don't rob banks. You go to law school and suck out the money that way. The church doesn't know what it's doing, and this is all part. On one hand, I'm very pleased that the church is trying to fix its structural flaws. But, this reimagination has been going on for 30, 40, 50 years. And it's, as you said, it's been doctrinal, it's been theological, it's been liturgical.
Well, in our human secular world, we can see the desire. I remember back in the mid-'80s, Pepsi was starting to outsell Coke. What do you mean? Well, it was happening, and Coke's reaction to a more dominant Pepsi was to provide us new Coke, and that went over like a lead balloon, George.
And Kevin, our viewers may wonder, where were we at the beginning of this week?
Yes. Oh.
I installed Windows 8. I can't swear on the air. Okay. I can't curse, but the worst 3 days of my life. What is Microsoft thinking?
Well,
this is junk. Expensive junk that doesn't work.
And ironically, Microsoft saw Apple gaining on their shares and said, we need to make a product like Apple and make it feel like Apple and be innovative like Apple. Why don't reimagine our next operating system as a Mac OS operating system? And George, I take it that didn't go so smoothly for you.
Well, it was as successful as the Episcopal Church deciding to become a cross between Planned Parenthood and the UN.
Right.
It makes as much sense that Microsoft forgot what its purpose was, what its business model was. Mm-hmm. It wanted to become Apple when its true business model was to provide a platform to provide services for business-oriented software. Mm-hmm. The Episcopal Church wants to be an agency for social change, to get out front on the justice issues, to have fawning editorials appear in the New York Times about its wise and far-sighted leaders. When the reality is its sole purpose for existing is to bring people into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. Yet it forgot that mission years ago.
Well, reimagine can occur. And Jesus arrived and he provided reimagination for Judaism. I refer you to the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. He said, this is what you believe, but this is the reality. And the Episcopal Church believes it can be a United Nations, believes it can be a Planned Parenthood, believes it can do carbon credits and all these things and present Christ. When in reality, it has to present Christ first for all those other things to assimilate into it.
And it has to present Christ alone. The church has a single purpose, which is to preach Christ crucified and him only. Its members, its people, they can go out, they can push carbon credits, they can push mosquito nets, they can push gun control, whatever floats their boat. But the point is that it is the church's job to bring them to his faith in Christ. And once you are filled with that power of the Holy Spirit, then you go out and work in the world to change it for the better. But when you skip the whole Jesus business and get down to the real work...
Preach it, George, but I can't but wonder if it's too late for tech. George, it's Lent, and you can't do Lent in the Episcopal Church without doing a story on Ashes to Go. Now, last year, I guess for the last 2 years, you and I have talked about this on Anglican Unscripted, and we have our views that are encouraging to the Episcopal Church for what they're doing, but also complaining for what they're doing. George, first let's start with your complaint about Ashes to Go.
It's one of the dumbest ideas I've ever seen and heard. I,
Okay.
I, I I don't know if I've made myself clear enough. Let me repeat myself. It's stupid.
It is an oddity that the one time a year that the priests come out of the church is to apply ashes. Now, the liturgy for Lent is to apply ashes in a penitential order to Christians, people of faith. But to stand outside of subways and to get the Buddhists coming off and the Hindus coming off and the Muslims coming off and oops, I got a Christian. Woo, I got a Christian is not really what we desire Lent to be, George. What is the liturgical experience of Lent?
Well, let's take two schools of thought, the only two schools of thought. Everything else is nonsense. The Anglo-Catholics, who are slightly wrong, and evangelicals, who are absolutely correct. Now, we need to understand what is going on. The priests who are going out into the street and a little dabble do you on your way to the office are totally misunderstanding the theology and the liturgy behind the imposition of ashes. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're an Anglo-Catholic, you believe that the ashes are a sacramental. That is an object that is used in the liturgy, and it cannot be used outside of the liturgy. If you're an Anglo-Catholic and you like to dress up and have candles on the altar and get all airy-fairy and stuff, and you want to take it out into the streets, you can't if you're consistent with your theology. And if you're penitential, you have to be penitential in this setting of a confession and forgiveness and just going, boom, I'm showing the world that I'm a Christian by a smudge on my forehead. That's an abomination. Well, that's the Anglo-Catholic side. If you're an evangelical and if you actually listen to the liturgy for the Ash Wednesday service, it's all about do not parade your piety in public. Stand in the closet and forgive yourself and ask God's forgiveness. Don't be like the Pharisees and the hypocrites who go out and show the world how wonderful they are by their by public protestations of faith. And what do we have now? People showing the world how wonderful they are because they got a smudge on their forehead.
It is.
My God, Kevin, this is just so symptomatic of how dumb the Episcopal Church can be.
I wish you had some opinion you could express here, George, but here's the honest reality. George and I support priests being on the street. The 99%
out of work.
Get
out of here, fellas.
Not out of work.
On the street, guys. Your jobs are done. Turn in your cards at the end of the day.
99% of the work of the church is done outside of the walls of the church. Okay, you bring Christ into the streets. You bring Christ into the neighborhoods, into the community. You let them know who Christ is. Now, a lot of times you let them know by showing them Christ in you. A lot of times you do that by teaching. A lot of times you do that by having fellowship and worship. There's lots of ways to show who Christ is.
Coming and holiness and prayer and reaching out to people.
Coming out of your little, caves once a year on Lent with black ashes on your thumb is not the witness of Christ. This is a service reserved for Christians who want to be penitential into the Lenten season where they want to draw closer in their relationship with the Father. 99% of the people who are getting ashes on the street have no idea of the purpose of Lent. And nor do the priests.
And the clergy who are doing this have no idea of the purpose of Lent.
Yeah.
Look, if you think this is a marketing trick that's going to get people into your dying church, it's not going to do it. I'm sorry. Because you're reaching out to the people who are not coming anyway, and now this is their excuse. They don't have to come back again.
Oh, yeah.
Because, they don't have to believe. They don't have to repent. They don't have to come to faith. They just have to have an outward sign of an invisible thing that didn't happen in their lives.
So, George and I have an opinion of ashes to go. And you heard it. Many of you are constant readers at AnglicanInc.com, where George and I have a sister site to Anglican Unscripted, where we post a lot of stuff that goes on the world every week. We get about 12 stories. We get about 3,000 people come and visit us each day. It's kind of cool. We posted a story early this weekend, Monday, between the Church of England and the Church of Uganda. It was based on some interview that the Archbishop did. Tell me the background, George.
Stanley Intigali, after church Sunday before last, spoke to a reporter for the Daily Monitor, a Kampala newspaper. And he went on to say that, we Ugandans are really fed up with the Church of England and the English telling us what to think and believe on homosexuality. They think their culture is superior to our culture. They think that we're just a bunch of dumb, ignorant Africans. And we'll break with the Church of England if they continue to push this down our throats. That's what the Daily Monitor reported. And I wrote up that story citing what the Daily Monitor said. And I also added some comments that Archbishop Stanley later made to a French news agency. Well, the story went up, and Archbishop Stanley wrote a little letter saying, "I'd like to clarify the remarks because I don't think you quite got what I intended to say. It isn't the culture, stupid. It's the fact that the Church of England is going to go to hell if it doesn't straighten out." So, I guess what I was trying, what was so fun was that the original statement was good, but the clarification was even better.
It was. No, and that's the reality that we often miss with our great GAFCON partners is they really know what they're talking about. And so they'll do a secular interview. The secular guy doesn't get it at all. Puts out a post, and we read that, and we try and build off that. But we have a Christian who really understands the gospel, really understands what's happening in England. And when you hear firsthand from him, let me clarify. You guys think it's the culture. It's not. It's the sin. And we want to thank Stanley for helping us out with a little clarity and making it. It was another great article and another reason that GAFCON is leading the charge. They're not leading from behind, which America is famous for. They're leading from the front. George, let's close out the show. And as people know, we've been doing the Find the Anglican TV logo segment, where people post on their church websites or ministry websites the Anglican TV logo. And we had 2 submissions this week. One is from the Anglican Church of the Resurrection in Brewster, which is on Cape Cod. This is their website, and you go way down the bottom here, you find the Anglican TV logo. Thank you. Another one comes from St. Stephen's Anglican Church, which proudly displays the Anglican logo on its website, and you can see their website here. I want to thank both of them for participating. If you want your church mentioned or your ministry mentioned on Anglican Unscripted, what you do is you add our logo to your website, front page, we insist, not some back page where nobody will see it. You send us the link and we'll mention your ministry or church on Anglican Unscripted. The details are here at anglican.tv/logo. George, interesting week for both of us. You had your Windows problem. I had several customers with consternations, but this is the first time all week that we've plugged in our technology and it actually worked. Let's be honest, George, we are under spiritual attack. Nodding your head's not going to help.
Yes, we are under great spiritual attack, personal attack, emotional attack, technical attack.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Having microphones work one day and then the video not work, and then the next day we get the mics working and then the video's out.
Yeah.
And back and forth, back and forth. Okay, if I move my system to Windows 8, that'll solve the problem. I don't know what was wrong with Windows 95, Kevin. It worked for me. I just don't like change.
Well, it's funny because Windows spent 15 years convincing people that the start buttons are really cool, and then they take it out with Windows 8, and they wonder why everybody's doing this whole new Coke thing on them. George and I do need your prayers. It should not take us 2 weeks of technical issues to put the show out. Granted, George and I put out what we call a bleeding edge technology show. Nobody else is doing this from an office to an office, side by side, live stream, the way we do it. There's a couple of people trying, but we could live stream this live if we wanted to. We're the only people that can do that because we're bleeding edge. And as such, Satan is allowed to attack us in many ways. It was hilarious because we would plug in our microphones and our cameras would go off. We would turn the cameras back on, the microphones would go off, the system would crash, George's computer couldn't update. It's crazy. So please keep us in your prayers on a weekly basis. If you want to add us to your prayers for the people at your church, add us to the community of prayers, whatever you need to do, do it.
And if you want to give me an Apple computer where I can move away from Microsoft and join the elect and the elite.
Yeah, George needs an iMac. And if you want to give a donation to Anglican TV and you put George's iMac in the memo, it will be one of those types of donations that is goes right to that gift of, well, your computer's like 2008, 2009. That's a dinosaur in our day and age. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 94 of Anglican Unscripted.
Three, two, one. George, let's move on to story one for our first week of Lent. On Anglican Unscripted 94, you and I search the internet, and we're kind of busybodies, and that's why we're so thin. We spend a lot of time on our computers. And we find the topic du jour, the topic of the week, and you just... how did you get... You've been placed on hold. I've been placed on hold? Why would you place me on hold?
The phone rang, and the microphone came down.